Hi, friends. All right, so this is our lesson for the week. Um, we did a quick overview, which you'll see um, on our page. And I want to just continue with performance. This is Carolee Schneeman's installation and performance up to and including her limits. Um, Currently, she has a show up at PS1 here in New York City, and it's a survey of really a lot of her work, and there's a lot that I'm leaving out. Um, she is someone that you could research and really look at, and she makes products as well as installations and performances, and um, and has been really wildly influential if we think about um, some of the people she's influenced. For example, Matthew Barney on the left is pretty well known, and in a lot of ways, her work um, it is directly related to his work, and you could say that he's continued to push the limits based on hers. Um, Also, the Algerian artist Adel Abdesmed did this piece where he hung from a helicopter to work on a drawing as well. So over here, with Schneeman, what she did is put herself in a restraint or a harness, and as long as she was attached to it, she would push herself to the limit that she could with that particular harness, and that would create a range of mark making, right? And as you can see, uh, there's on the one on the right, piece on the right, there's a field where mark making can occur, and um, and these are some of her quotes, right? My entire body becomes the agency of visual traces, vestige of the body's energy and motion. And one of the things she's known for is terming kinetic theater, like this idea that she's engaged in kinetic theater. It's and if we think that we're always on performance, right? Our movement, our energy is a type of trace of the body's energy and motion. And it's a really beautiful idea. And artists, what they do is really take a piece of something that we're not noticing and make it visible. Um, this is a wonderful piece. Another question she had is, could a nude woman artist be both the image, as there on the left, we see her as in the piece, and an image maker? And clearly the answer is yes, but it's an interesting problem to investigate, especially with the history of how women were treated as subjects in very few artists up until about this time. Okay. She was inspired, as some people might think this is a little bit like Jackson Pollock in terms of the correlating energy to image, right? The sort of gesture of painting, the sort of physicality of the drips of Pollock. And here, the physicality of the movement. She was inspired by Pollock, without question. And I won't really spend much time here, but Matthew Barney, um, his drawing restraint series, which probably continues till today, um, was very much about stretching the limits. But for him, it may have shifted just a little bit in that the resistance itself is what produces growth. So if we think of, he was an athlete, and he did this work, he began this work at Yale. So if you think about um, if you work out with weights, right? You do some barbell curls, right? If you do enough of them, the next day your muscles are sore. It's because they've ripped, and over a couple of days they'll heal back and they'll actually be stronger. So this idea of restraint and resistance and pushing against that resistance will create growth. Here's another Carolee Schneeman piece. It's called Interior Scroll. And this was very shocking to people. Um, this was a performance that first took place in East Hampton, New York. And she said she was going to read from her book, Cezanne. She was a great painter. And she proceeded to take a scroll from her vagina and read it. And that reading what she read this book from that, and one could she talked about it a little bit, and I would just think about it in political terms, like who has had agency over women's body historically, and we can even just think about the United States. In the 1800s, if a married couple and the husband didn't like his wife anymore, he could say that she was hysterical, literally hysterical. That was the quote. And she could be committed to a mental institution. You have to remember in the early 1900s, women couldn't even vote, they couldn't have access to birth control. So these pieces, right, the agency for women, have historically been dictated by men. And so if you think about it, she talks about it, if you think about the process of the interior, right, inside of a woman is being regulated by someone other than a woman. And so this was a piece where she wanted to put herself on display and bring words out, her own words from inside to outside. Right? She also did typical model poses when she was doing this piece, which also figures her as a work of art, like she was saying, thinking about can a nude woman be a work of art and the artist. So she's an important person to look at. And if you're not finished with your performances, she's someone who's you might want to read about a little bit more in depth and get ideas. Okay, we're switching gears. This is Chris Burden, 5-day locker piece. And he was in locker number 5 there. I can't really tell which one's which, except it would be definitely in the middle row. And how do I know that? Because he was locked in for 5 days. He made a hole in one of the lockers above where he had 5 gallons of water, and he had a hole a little bit in the bottom where he had 5 gallons, a 5-gallon bucket. So he was stuck in the middle for 5 days and locked in. Now, it's probably that middle row because it's all locked. His wife was there outside of it just in case, I guess, if there was a major crisis. But, this is a great piece to ask yourself, what is this about? Why is this art? Where is the art? What are the themes? So I want you to think about that. I'm not giving you an assignment to write about Chris Burden, okay? These are the type of things that I like my class to run with, and I have found a little bit difficult with the synchronous asynchronous because a lot of you aren't showing up to the synchronous, and if you have, you're not really prepared. So I'm asking you, right? Think about this. Think about this Chris Burden piece. Come with some thoughts about it and some questions, right? And we'll talk about that during the synchronous time. It'll really be exciting because you're going to have different points of view. Here's another piece he did called Transfixed, right? He had himself nailed in the form of crucifix to a VW car, okay? And it was driven around a gallery in LA, all right? He literally had nails put through his hands into the car. And he wasn't like that for very long, but nonetheless, he was like that. So again, you can think about I'm happy to talk about this on Wednesday night. But I really like you to investigate just a little bit, not necessarily research, but ask yourself, what might this mean? Because you'll get so much further if you think about it and question it. Even if it drives you crazy and you don't understand it, thinking about it will help, and we'll talk about it, all right? Great. Here's another piece he did, Doorway to Heaven, where he took 2 wires, live electric wires, and put them, crossed them, and he ended up burning his chest a bit, but he did not die. This is another piece. Also did a piece called Dead Man. He positioned himself behind the rear wheels of a parked car in front of the gallery on a busy street. And he laid down covered with a tarp right? So you couldn't see that there was a person there. And there were a couple of flares put in front of that. So essentially, if the flares had gone out, um, it's possible he would have been killed, right? He was arrested because it caused a false emergency, and he ended up doing some more, even more radical. The case was dismissed. He did some even more crazy pieces where he hijacked um, a TV reporter in a strange way, but really talking about the nature of how we get our news, etc. He's a really interesting artist, and I encourage you to think about him and to possibly even look him up. All right, here's another piece. He was shot by his friend. So he stood there, he had his friend shoot him. It's a small caliber rifle, but you know, that was his piece. And there are some visuals of it. Um, this is a more contemporary artist, but I want to watch this with you here, and then come back to thinking um, how this kind of connects us a little bit to conceptual art to come. But it gives you another opportunity to think about your own performances. It's a little different. It's a little less rooted in the body. It's a little more conceptual.
This work is work number 850 or 850. I can't always think how to title things, so I always use numbers just to have a way of identifying what I do, what I try to do. But and the work it consists of people running through the gallery, or it consists of a person running through the gallery every 30 seconds. I was asked by the Tate if I could think that I might imagine making something for the Divine galleries, and immediately this is what I thought of, and I thought that the Divine galleries, being so long, were a good theatre for this work. Because it's almost the length of, say, a sprinting, like an indoor sprinting track. If I think about running and why it is that I like it, I think that it is perhaps because it's an exciting action. And I think it's also an example of being alive. If you think of death as being still, perfectly still, and so the opposite of death would be, to move as fast as you possibly can. And I think of art, or the experience of art, always as a live experience. A painting may be a fixed, static object, but the experience of looking at a painting is always a live one, because people are alive and constantly moving, the heart's beating. So the experience of looking at things is always in movement, and in my mind there isn't such a leap from a painting to a person running in the gallery, which is of course a moving or kinetic work. That's not necessarily, why I made this piece. I made the piece, I think, originally when I thought about it, because I thought it was funny, really, and it makes me smile, when I see people running through the gallery, When I was working on the piece, I was thinking that, like in the street, if you're in the street and someone runs past, it's often can be quite shocking. Like, oh, what's happening? Like, has there been a theft or like a shoplifter running away from the police or something like that? It can be quite shocking when you see someone running in the street. So I think running in general stands out, Probably the one place it wouldn't stand out would be like an athletics meeting. you know, so that would probably be not the place to display the running piece. Artists do not make art. Artists make things. Objects, whatever it may be, paintings, sculptures. They make stupid objects, which get used as art, by human beings. So someone should not, and I'm actually not the person to ask about whether this is art, because it's not me that decides if something's art or not. The person asking that question can decide for themselves, or should question in general the fact that certain objects are used and treated as art by the general world that we live in. Art's just a word.
Okay. So hopefully you enjoyed that. And here's another one of his pieces. So it's just a room, and every 5 seconds the light goes on, the light goes off, the light goes on, and so on. Okay? And, you know, again, I really want to not serve it up to you on a platter because I don't think it's any one thing what this work means and what art is about in this case. But I do want you to think about this, and we'll talk about this on Wednesday. Okay? Really know these pieces, right? So that we can talk about them. I just wanted to share a performance I did back, I guess in the early to mid '90s. For 30 days, I wore this sign and signs like it. Hello, my name is Jesse. It's okay to talk to me. And I walked around the city wearing it, and in New York City, and I engaged with people when they talked to me, and it was a really interesting experience. And for me, the unexpected piece, like, so my rationale, thinking about your performances, which you don't have to do, but my rationale was that New York City, the subways and some of the streets are the most shared spaces, and yet they're some of the most quiet spaces in that we don't engage with each other often. And I wanted to create a little bit of an invitation where people might go that little bit extra and talk where they otherwise wouldn't. And I figured it would begin with, what are you wearing that sign for? What is this? And then I would engage with them, right? So, in that sense, the performance would be fulfilling some of my objectives. What was interesting about it, and what I learned about it not until the piece was over, is that my expectation shifted. So, somehow, going through the world, even to this day, people come up to me all the time and talk to me. And it's not because they saw this performance or recognize me in any way. It's that when I walk in the street, somehow I'm more open than I used to be to conversation and to individuals, strangers. And when I'm walking on the street, there's something about me that now is oriented to being receptive rather than off putting. And I can't locate it exactly, but this piece really was transformative for me in that respect. Gordon Matta Clark, I think I mentioned him last lesson. He did this piece called Splitting, where he took a house and a chainsaw and he literally went through the entire house and split it. And he was very much interested in drawing our attention to architecture in a lot of ways and bringing the outside in. I think we looked at Day's End, where he cut a hole of the moon, so to speak, in the warehouse, and it brought both the sunlight and the moonlight into the warehouse. He also did this piece called Bronx Floors, where he cut out floors from abandoned buildings in the Bronx. And there were scenes where he went there, and cops came and they said, "Oh, yeah, yeah, we were told to do this." And he was like, "Let go." Um, that's how kind of crazy the Bronx was at that time. It was super rundown. And he was punctuating like or puncturing space and making us think about where and what a home is. He also would reclaim pieces. So, for example, in homes that were being torn down, this was being torn down. He would by turning it into a work of art, reclaim some of its value. Okay. Look at Manzoni here, and so Manzoni, this is a piece. You could say it's part of a performance, but it certainly starts pushing the boundaries of what do we consider art. Sealed in that container is his poop. It's called Artist Shit, number 31. Okay? 1961, so it's really early. It's coming out concurrent with the pop artists, and it's coming out of some of that conversation that Rauschenberg was having of where are the limits of art, right? I'll let you decide whether you think that's art or not, and we'll talk about that. Also, this was a piece. He'd give away balloons at a gallery, 1960. But if you wanted to pay for a balloon with his breath in it filled up, you'd have to pay. He'd give away the empty balloons, but you'd have to pay for this one. Okay? So it's a really interesting piece insofar as he's talking about commodity, um, and the sort of purchasing power that goes into reifying what art is. So he's talking about it as a consumable, but also what could make art, right? What are the things? Is it the artist itself? Is it, and this can lay the foundation for conceptual art. All right, and this is as far as we'll go for this lesson today. Okay, so conceptual art. The idea was to eliminate the encounter with objects. We conceptual artists want us to think about the ideas behind it. So this is less about a balloon, and maybe this is less about shit, and it's more about the ideas behind it. Okay, um, and in that sense, this flux is sort of object making, but like really kind of democratic and engaging politically was something with performance that Fluxus artists were thinking about. Um, in 1967, and we're going to make a solo it, right? An article identifies it as a discrete art form, and it's generally non-traditional media, architectural drawings, books, photos, performances become on equal footing as drawing and painting. So the 60s is really where art changes, goes from a modernist tradition to a postmodernist tradition. We'll talk about how conceptual art really is the breaking point for modernism, when now the sort of um, encounter with the object, the unique object, isn't as important as the ideas behind them. And it doesn't remove painting and sculpture as viable mediums, but it changes it. Okay? So let's sit on that. Come Wednesday with your performances, if not done, I'd rather them actually not be done, right? I want them almost done. Think of them as a full draft, right? So that we can workshop them together. Does that sound good? All right. Friends, have a great week.